Hi everyone, welcome back to a new Roblox story. This time, the story is about the popular Roblox game 99 Nights in the Forest. As always, not all of our stories are based on true events, but some are, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the story, if you dare. Before we start the story, shout out to Thunder and Winnie Kitty. Thanks to you all for watching our podcast. Jake stared at the dying campfire, its orange glow barely reaching the edge of their small camp. The woodpile sat empty beside him, and darkness pressed closer with each passing second. "We need more wood," he whispered to his teammate Sam, who was crafting something at the workbench. "The fire is almost out." Sam didn't look up from the grinder. "I'm trying to make a flashlight. The fur trader should be here soon." "Sam, we don't have time," Jake's voice cracked. The sun had set 20 minutes ago, and everyone knew what that meant. The deer was out there, watching, waiting. The fire flickered lower. Jake grabbed his basic axe and looked toward the tree line. In the distance, he could see fallen branches, but they were at least 50 meters away. The campfire's light barely reached 10 meters now. "Don't go out there." Sam finally looked up, fear clear in his voice. "Remember what happened to Maya yesterday?" Jake remembered. Maya had stepped just outside the light to grab some carrots from their farm plot. They found her tent empty the next morning, with deep claw marks in the dirt. But there was more to Maya's disappearance that they hadn't talked about. The way her supplies had been arranged in perfect circles around her tent, as if someone had been studying them. The way her flashlight had been left standing upright in the exact center of the camp, still glowing, as if placed there deliberately. The fire crackled weakly. 5 minutes, maybe less, before it died completely. "I have to try," Jake said, gripping his axe tighter. "If this fire goes out, we're both dead." He took a deep breath and stepped to the very edge of the light. The darkness beyond seemed alive, shifting and moving. Jake switched on his basic flashlight. Its weak beam barely penetrated the black forest ahead. The trees looked different at night, twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. During the day, this forest looked normal, even peaceful. But when darkness fell, it transformed into something else entirely. Crack! A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness. Jake froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The sound came from his left, near the old bear cave they'd explored earlier. But it wasn't the random crack of wood settling or small animals moving. It was deliberate, purposeful, like something large, testing its weight on the forest floor. "Jake, come back!" Sam hissed from behind him. "I can hear something moving." But Jake was already running. His feet pounded against the forest floor as he sprinted toward the fallen branches. The flashlight beam bounced wildly, showing glimpses of trees, rocks, and shadows that might have been something else. The forest floor was covered with a thick layer of fallen leaves that muffled his footsteps, but also muffled any sounds of pursuit. Behind him, he could hear Sam screaming his name, but the words seemed to fade, as if the forest itself was swallowing the sound. Jake reached the first branch and grabbed it, not bothering to chop it properly. The wood was heavy and awkward, but he dragged it anyway. His flashlight flickered. The battery was dying. As the beam grew dimmer, Jake noticed something that made his blood freeze. All around him, carved into the bark of nearby trees, were symbols. Not random scratches from animals, but deliberate markings that looked almost like writing. That's when he heard it. A low, rumbling sound, like breathing, but wrong somehow, too deep, too slow, too controlled. Jake spun around, shining his dying flashlight toward the noise. 2 enormous eyes reflected the light back at him. They were too big, too bright, floating 8 feet off the ground. Below them, Jake could make out the outline of something massive and wrong. A body that seemed to shift between human and animal, with antlers that scraped against the tree branches above. The creature stood perfectly still, as if it had been waiting there for hours. The deer had found him, But instead of immediately charging, the creature tilted its head and seemed to study him. Its eyes weren't filled with the mindless hunger Jake had expected. There was intelligence there, and something else. Something that almost looked like sadness. Jake dropped the branch and ran. His flashlight died completely, plunging him into absolute darkness. Behind him, he could hear heavy footsteps. First 2 legs, then 4, then 2 again, as if the creature couldn't decide what it wanted to be. But the footsteps weren't getting closer. It was almost as if the deer was following him, but keeping its distance deliberately. The campfire was just ahead. Jake could see its faint glow through the trees, but it was so weak now, barely more than embers. Sam was frantically throwing anything he could find into the flames, crafting materials, even his own wooden tools. "Jake, hurry!" Sam shouted. Jake stumbled, his foot catching on a root. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his knee. When he looked back, the deer was right there, its massive head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its mouth opened, revealing teeth that belonged on no earthly creature. But the creature didn't attack. Instead, it reached down with one clawed hand and picked up the branch Jake had dropped. For a moment, their eyes met, and Jake saw something in those inhuman features that shocked him. The deer looked sad, not angry, not hungry, but heartbreakingly sad. The campfire flared suddenly as Sam's wooden tools caught flame. The deer shrieked and stumbled backward, covering its eyes with clawed hands. Jake scrambled to his feet and dove into the light just as the creature reached for him. Safe in the campfire's glow, Jake collapsed next to Sam. They both stared out at the darkness, where they could still see those terrible eyes watching them. But now, Jake noticed something he had missed before. The deer wasn't pacing back and forth like a predator. It was standing at the very edge of the light, holding the branch Jake had tried to collect. Slowly, carefully, the creature placed the branch at the edge of their safe zone and stepped back. "The wood!" Jake gasped. "I dropped the wood!" Sam held up a handful of sticks. "I broke apart the crafting table. It should last another hour, maybe 2. He paused, looking at the branch the deer had delivered. "Did that thing just help us?" Jake stared at the offered wood. "I don't know, maybe." They sat in silence, feeding their makeshift fuel to the hungry flames. Outside the light, the deer paced back and forth, occasionally testing the edge of their safe zone before retreating with angry snarls. But every so often, it would stop and look directly at them, and Jake could swear he saw longing in those terrible eyes. "What do we do when this runs out?" Sam asked quietly. Jake looked around their camp. They had already burned the extra crafting bench, most of their wooden tools, and even some of the fence posts. There wasn't much left. But now they had the branch the deer had brought them. It was good wood, dry and perfect for burning. "We pray for sunrise," Jake whispered, "and we try to understand what's really happening here." But dawn was still 6 hours away, and their pile of wood was getting smaller by the minute. In the darkness beyond, the deer settled down to wait. It had all the time in the world. The campfire flickered lower, and Jake began to understand why the missing children's posters looked so terrified. Some nights, no matter how hard you fought, the darkness always won in the end. But maybe, just maybe, the darkness wasn't what they thought it was. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. When the first rays of sunlight finally pierced through the forest canopy, Jake and Sam were exhausted. They had spent the entire night feeding scraps to their dying fire, watching the woodpile dwindle to nothing. But they had also spent time thinking about the deer's strange behavior. "It could have killed me," Jake said, rubbing his tired eyes. "When I fell, when the flashlight died, I was completely helpless. But it didn't attack." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "And it brought you wood." Predators don't usually help their prey gather resources. They had been playing this survival horror game for weeks now, and they thought they understood the rules. Stay near light sources at night. Avoid the deer monster at all costs. Gather resources during the day and prepare for the next nighttime assault. But last night had shown them that maybe the rules weren't what they seemed. We need a better plan, Sam said. We can't keep burning our equipment every night. Jake nodded, looking at the missing children posters on their notice board. 4 smiling faces stared back at him. Dino Kid, Kraken Kid, Squid Kid, and Koala Kid. Each poster showed a different coloured outfit, and Jake knew from other players' experiences that rescuing each child would give them precious time bonuses. But looking at the posters now, after his encounter with the deer, Jake noticed details he had missed before. The children's faces weren't just scared, they looked expectant, hopeful. And in the background of each poster, barely visible, were symbols that matched the markings he had seen carved into the trees. We need to find the children, Jake said. Each one we rescue adds a full day to our counter. That's less nights we have to survive. But rescuing them means going deep into the forest, Sam protested. Maya tried that, remember? Jake remembered. But they didn't have a choice. Their supplies were running dangerously low, and winter was coming. The weather had been getting colder each night, and rain made their campfire burn through fuel even faster. Plus, there had been signs that other players were struggling too. In the distance, they could see smoke from other campfires, but those smoke plumes were getting fewer each day. I found something yesterday, Jake said quietly, before the fire almost went out. There's a watchtower about 1/2 kilometre north. It might have better equipment. Sam looked skeptical. That's pretty far from camp. We'll go together, during the day, and we'll take everything we can carry. They spent the morning preparing. Jake crafted a better backpack while Sam gathered every scrap of metal they could find. The grinder churned steadily as they converted old cans and broken tools into useful materials. As they worked, Jake told Sam about all the things he had noticed during his encounter with the deer. The symbols on the trees weren't random, Jake explained. They looked like they were trying to tell a story. Pictures of people, animals, buildings, like cave paintings, but more recent. What kind of story? Sam asked. I'm not sure, but some of the symbols looked like families, parents and children holding hands, and others showed the same figures being separated, locked in different places. Sam paused his grinding. You think the deer is trying to communicate? Maybe. Or maybe someone else is, and the deer is just part of the story. While they crafted, Jake also told Sam about the sounds he had heard during the night. Beyond the deer's footsteps, beyond the crackling of their fire, there had been other noises in the forest. Voices, distant but clear, speaking in a language he didn't recognize. And underneath it all, the sound of children crying. Not scared crying, Jake clarified. Lonely crying, like they were calling for someone who couldn't hear them. Look at this, Sam said, holding up a piece of paper he'd found in their supply chest. It's a map. Jake examined the crude drawing. It showed their campfire at the center, with various landmarks marked around it. The watchtower was clearly marked to the north, but there were other symbols too. Caves, ruins, and something marked as stronghold. But now that Jake looked more closely, he could see that the map showed more than just locations. There were dotted lines connecting different areas, like paths or routes, and some of those paths had small numbers written next to them, as if someone had been tracking how long it took to travel between locations. What's a stronghold? Jake asked. I don't know, but look at this. Sam pointed to small numbers written next to each location. These look like day counters. The watchtower says day 5 to 15, but the stronghold says day 20 plus. So we're not ready for the stronghold yet, Jake concluded. But the watchtower should be manageable. They packed light but smart, basic tools, some food, and their precious flashlights. But Jake also packed something else, paper and charcoal. If they encountered more of those symbols, he wanted to copy them down and try to understand what they meant. The journey north took them through parts of the forest they'd never explored, past ancient trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. As they walked, Jake pointed out more of the carved symbols. They were everywhere once you knew to look for them, on tree trunks, carved into rocks, even scratched into the ground. "This place gives me the creeps," Sam muttered, as they walked through a grove where the trees had grown in perfect circles. "It's like someone planted them that way on purpose." Jake had to agree. The deeper they went into the forest, the more unnatural everything seemed. Rocks were arranged in patterns that looked almost like symbols. Animal tracks followed perfectly straight lines instead of the random paths real animals would make. And there were structures hidden among the trees. Not buildings exactly, but arrangements of stones and wood that suggested intelligent design. Someone's been living here, Jake realized. Not just camping like us, actually living here for a long time. They passed what looked like old campsites, long abandoned but still organized. Fire pits surrounded by carefully arranged stones. Lean-tos built from branches and covered with moss. And everywhere more symbols carved into trees and rocks. "There!" Jake pointed ahead. The watchtower. The structure was taller than they had expected. A wooden tower that stretched up through the forest canopy. A ladder led up the outside, disappearing into the shadows above. But now that they were closer, Jake could see that the tower wasn't just functional. It was decorated with carved symbols that matched the ones they had been seeing throughout the forest. "Should we both go up?" Sam asked nervously. Jake shook his head. "One of us stays down here to watch for trouble. I'll climb up first." The ladder creaked ominously under Jake's weight, but it held. As he climbed higher, he could see more of the forest spreading out below him. From this height, he could spot their campfire smoke in the distance, and several other landmarks marked on their map. But what caught his attention was something the map didn't show. "Sam!" Jake called down. "There are more camps out there." "What do you mean?" "Other campfires. I can see the smoke. There are other survivors in the forest." But as Jake looked more closely, he realized something troubling. Most of the smoke plumes were very thin, suggesting fires that were barely staying lit. And some of them seemed to be coming from locations that didn't make sense, deep in areas where no player should be able to survive. Jake reached the top of the watchtower and found a small room filled with old equipment. Most of it was broken, but there were some useful items: a better flashlight, some emergency flares, and a radio that might still work. But there were also other things that made Jake's skin crawl. Journal pages scattered across a makeshift desk, filled with observations about the forest and its inhabitants. The handwriting was different on each page, as if multiple people had been using this watchtower as a base. Some entries were recent, others looked decades old. Day 12. The children are still crying at night, getting closer to finding them. Day 23. Saw the deer again. It watched me for an hour but didn't attack, beginning to think it's not hunting us. Day 67. Found symbols near the Red Cave. They tell a story. Need to understand what happened here. Day 134. The cultists found our camp. Had to relocate. The tower is safe for now. Day. Time moves strangely here. Have been looking for the children for years now, or maybe days. Hard to tell. Jake gathered the most recent journal pages and continued searching the room. In a corner, hidden under a pile of old equipment, he found something that made his blood freeze. A photograph. Black and white, clearly old, showing a family posing in front of what looked like a research facility. A woman in a lab coat stood next to 4 small children, all wearing the same distinctive hats shown in the missing children posters. But the photograph wasn't damaged or faded. It looked like it had been taken yesterday. As he gathered the supplies, Jake tried the radio. Static filled the air, but underneath the noise, he could hear something that made his blood freeze. Voices. Human voices, but wrong somehow. They spoke in unison, chanting words he couldn't understand, but mixed in with the chanting, he could hear other sounds: children laughing, adults having quiet conversations, normal family sounds but distorted by the static. "Jake, hurry up," Sam called from below. "I think I hear something coming." Jake stuffed the supplies and journal pages into his backpack and started down the ladder. Sam was standing at the base, looking nervously into the forest. "What kind of something?" Jake asked as his feet hit the ground. "Footsteps, multiple sets, and they're not trying to be quiet." They both listened. Through the trees came the sound of heavy boots marching in perfect rhythm. Not the chaotic sounds of frightened people, but the organized movement of a group with purpose. And underneath the marching, Jake could hear that same chanting he had picked up on the radio. "We need to hide," Jake whispered. They ducked behind the base of the watchtower just as the first figures emerged from the forest. Jake peeked around the corner and felt his heart sink. Cultists, at least 6 of them, wearing dark robes and carrying crude weapons, axes, spears, and crossbows. They moved with military precision, searching the area around the watchtower. But as Jake watched them more closely, he realized they weren't quite human. Their movements were too coordinated, too synchronized. And when one of them turned its head, Jake saw that its eyes glowed with the same unnatural light as the deer's. One of them spoke, and Jake recognized the voice from the radio. It was the same flat, emotionless tone. "The tower has been disturbed. Fresh scent. 2 humans recently departed." Another cultist nodded, its head moving in a jerky, mechanical way. "The deer will want to know. New subjects in the forest. Search pattern 7. They cannot have gone far." The cultists spread out, beginning a systematic search of the area. Jake and Sam pressed themselves against the tower's base, trying to stay hidden. But Jake could see through cracks in the wooden structure, and what he saw made him even more afraid. The cultists weren't just searching randomly. They were following the symbols carved into the trees, using them like a map or guide. And they seemed to be able to communicate without speaking, coordinating their search with subtle gestures and looks. But their luck ran out when one of the cultists walked directly toward their hiding spot. It moved with purpose, as if it knew exactly where they were hiding. "Run!" Jake shouted. They broke from cover and sprinted into the forest. Behind them, the cultists let out inhuman shrieks and gave chase. Unlike the deer, these creatures could pursue them in daylight. And unlike normal people, they didn't seem to get tired. Jake and Sam ran harder than they had ever run before. Branches tore at their clothes and roots tried to trip them, but they didn't dare slow down. The cultists were fast and they knew the forest better. But Jake had studied the journal pages he'd found, and he remembered reading about safe places and hiding spots. "This way," Sam gasped, veering toward a thick grove of trees. They dove into the undergrowth, just as arrows whistled overhead. The cultists were firing crossbows at them, the bolts embedding in tree trunks with solid thunks. But Jake noticed that the arrows weren't aimed to kill. They were aimed to wound and capture. "We can't outrun them," Jake panted. "We need to fight." Fight those things? With what? Jake pulled out his basic axe. Hardly a match for their weapons, but it was all they had. Sam grabbed a fallen branch, wielding it like a club. But as they prepared to make their stand, something unexpected happened. The cultists stopped chasing them. Jake and Sam crouched in the undergrowth, listening to the sounds of the cultists moving through the forest. But instead of continuing their pursuit, the creatures seemed to be retreating. "Why did they stop?" Sam whispered. Jake carefully peeked through the leaves and saw something that explained everything. The cultists were standing at the edge of a clearing, looking nervously at something carved into a large oak tree. The symbol was different from the others they had seen, more complex, more detailed, and as Jake watched, he saw the cultists backing away from the symbol as if it caused them physical pain. "The symbols," Jake breathed. "They're not just decorations, they're protection." The cultists eventually disappeared back into the forest, their chanting fading into the distance. Jake and Sam waited another hour before emerging from their hiding spot, but when they did, they had a new understanding of how the forest worked. Someone carved those symbols to keep the cultists away, Sam observed. Someone who knew what they were dealing with. Jake nodded, thinking about the journal pages he had found. Multiple people had been in this forest before them, trying to survive, trying to understand what was happening. And some of them had figured out at least part of the puzzle. The journey home took twice as long as the trip out. They moved carefully, watching for signs of more cultists and looking for the protective symbols that seemed to mark safe areas. When they finally saw their campfire smoke rising through the trees, they both felt overwhelming relief. But their relief was short-lived. Their camp had been ransacked. The crafting table was overturned, their supply chests had been emptied, and strange symbols were carved into the trees around their campfire. But these weren't the protective symbols they had seen in the forest. These were different, more aggressive-looking. Most disturbing of all, there were new items scattered around their camp, items they had never seen before. Animal bones arranged in patterns, crude dolls made from sticks and cloth, and hanging from one of the trees, a sign painted in what looked like dried blood. The sign read, "The children are calling." "What does that mean?" Sam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake examined the missing children posters on their notice board. The images seemed different somehow, though he couldn't put his finger on what had changed. Then he realized. The children in the posters were looking directly at him. Before, their eyes had been looking off to the side, as if posing for a photograph. Now they stared straight forward, as if they could see through the paper. And their expressions had changed, too. Instead of the scared, hopeful faces he remembered, they now looked expectant, as if they were waiting for something. "Sam," Jake said slowly, "look at the posters." Sam looked, then stepped backward in shock. That's not... They weren't doing that before, as they watched. One of the posters, the Dino Kid, seemed to move slightly. The child's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, and one small hand seemed to wave. "We need to rescue them," Jake said suddenly. "That's what this is about. The cultists, the deer, all of it. They're trying to tell us something." "Or trying to lure us into a trap," Jake shook his head. "Think about it. Every legend about this forest mentions missing children. What if they're not just game objectives? What if they're real?" He pulled out the photograph he had found in the watchtower and showed it to Sam. The image was even clearer now, as if it was developing itself. The woman in the lab coat looked kind but worried. The 4 children looked happy but scared. "This was taken here," Jake said. "In this forest. These are the same children from the posters." Sam studied the photograph, then looked at the journal pages Jake had brought back. "These entries, they're from different people, but they're all looking for the same children, like they've been missing for decades." "What if time works differently here?" Jake suggested. "What if this forest exists in multiple time periods at once?" It sounded crazy, but it was the only explanation that made sense. The old equipment in the watchtower, the journal entries from different eras, the way the photograph looked both ancient and current. They spent the rest of the day repairing their camp and building better defenses. Jake crafted bear traps, while Sam worked on reinforcing their walls. They also started work on a level 2 crafting table, which would give them access to better equipment. But as they worked, Jake found himself studying the journal pages more carefully. The entries told a story of researchers who had been conducting experiments in the forest. Something had gone wrong, separating families and trapping people in a loop of time and space. The subjects show remarkable adaptation to temporal displacement. One entry read, "However, emotional trauma appears to anchor them to specific temporal coordinates." Children demonstrate strongest resistance to chronological drift. Maternal bonds remain stable across multiple timeline iterations. Warning: do not attempt to extract subjects individually. Family units must be kept together to prevent cascade failure. Sam, Jake said quietly, I think I know what happened here. He showed Sam the most disturbing journal entry, written in handwriting that looked much more recent than the others. Day 1847. Have been trapped in forest for 5 years now, or 50 years, or 5 minutes. Time doesn't work normally here. The experiments damaged something fundamental about this place. Families got separated across different time periods. The children are stuck in one timeline, the mother in another. The cultists are the researchers, transformed by their own experiments and unable to remember who they used to be. The only way out is to reunite the family units. But every attempt fails because the rescue process itself causes temporal disruption. Need to find a new approach. This is insane, Sam said. But it explains everything. The deer isn't hunting us. It's a mother looking for her children. The cultists aren't evil. They're trapped researchers who can't remember their original mission. And we're not just players in a game, Jake realized. We're part of the rescue attempt. As night approached, they made sure their campfire was well fueled and their weapons were ready. But this time, they also prepared something new. If the children are trying to communicate, Jake said, maybe we should try to communicate back. He had found some paper and charcoal in their supply chest. While Sam kept watch, Jake wrote a simple message and pinned it to the notice board next to the missing children posters. We want to help. Tell us where you are. Then they settled in to wait for whatever the night would bring. The deer came again, but this time its behavior was completely different. Instead of pacing around their camp, trying to get closer, it stood at the very edge of their firelight and seemed to be reading. Its massive eyes moved from their faces to the notice board, then back again. It's like it's trying to figure something out, Sam whispered. Jake nodded. The creature's massive eyes moved between their faces and the notice board, as if trying to understand the message they had left. And for the first time since they had arrived in the forest, the deer looked hopeful. After what felt like hours, the deer let out a sound unlike anything they had heard before. Not the angry snarl or threatening growl they were used to, but something that sounded almost like relief, like a sob of joy. Then it disappeared into the forest, leaving them alone with their flickering fire. When morning came, they found their answer. Someone, or something, had left new items around their camp during the night. 4 small objects, each a different color: red, blue, yellow, and purple. Keys. But these weren't ordinary keys. They seemed to pulse with their own internal light. And when Jake picked up the red key, immediately knowledge flooded his mind. He knew exactly where to go, exactly what he would find. The Dino Kid was waiting in a red cave, guarded by 5 wolves. The cave was northeast of their camp, past the old ruins. But more than that, he could feel the child's emotions. Loneliness, hope, and a deep love for someone far away. A mother who had been searching for decades. Do you feel that? He asked Sam. Sam was holding the blue key, his eyes wide with the same sudden understanding. The Kraken Kid, Blue Cave, Alpha Wolves. He looked up at Jake. How do I know that? And why do I feel so sad all of a sudden? The keys, Jake realized. They're not just tools, they're connections. We're feeling what the children feel. The purple and yellow keys remained on the ground, waiting. Jake carefully picked them up, and immediately the emotional weight doubled. 4 children, all afraid, all hoping, all calling out for their mother across time and space. We have to help them, Jake said, tears streaming down his face. They've been waiting so long. They gathered their supplies and set out immediately. The Red Cave wasn't far, but the journey took them through territory they had never explored. Ancient ruins dotted the landscape, stone foundations and crumbling walls covered in vines and moss. But now Jake could see that these weren't random ruins. They were the remains of a research facility spread out across miles of forest. "This place has been abandoned for a long time," Sam observed. Jake nodded, but something about the ruins bothered him. They weren't old enough to be natural historical sites, but they were definitely too old to be recent construction. It was as if time moved differently in this forest, aging some things rapidly while preserving others perfectly. As they walked through the ruins, Jake found more evidence of the experiments that had taken place here. Laboratory equipment scattered among the trees, observation notes carved into stone walls, and everywhere, those symbols that seemed to serve as both communication and protection. They found the Red Cave exactly where Jake had known it would be. 5 wolves with red collars paced back and forth in front of the entrance, their eyes reflecting the daylight in an unnatural way. "Those aren't normal wolves," Sam said. Jake had to agree. The animals moved too intelligently, too purposefully, and their eyes looked almost human. Sad, confused, and desperate. "We need to help them too," Jake realized. "Look at their collars. Those aren't natural. Someone put those on them." As they got closer, Jake could see that the collars were more than just restraints. They were technological devices, pulsing with the same strange energy as the keys. And the wolves weren't acting aggressive. They were acting protective, as if they were guarding something precious. "They don't want to fight us," Sam observed. "They're scared." The fight was difficult, but not impossible. The wolves seemed reluctant to actually hurt them, as if they were following orders they didn't want to obey. When Jake managed to remove the first collar, something amazing happened. The device crackled with electricity and dissolved into sparks, and the wolf immediately stopped attacking. But more than that, the wolf looked at Jake with gratitude and relief, before running into the forest, finally free. With each collar removed, the remaining wolves became less aggressive, as if they could sense that Jake and Sam were there to help, not harm. When the last collar fell away, the entrance to the Red Cave was clear. Jake used the red key, and the lock opened with a soft click that seemed to echo across time itself. Inside the cave was a small chamber with stone walls covered in children's drawings. But these weren't crude stick figures. They were detailed, beautiful pictures that showed a family's life before everything went wrong. A mother and 4 children playing in a normal house, going to school, having birthday parties. Happy memories preserved in crayon and charcoal. And at the back of the chamber, sitting on a small bed made of soft moss and flower petals, was a small figure in a yellow dinosaur hat. The Dino Kid. But something was both wrong and right about the picture. The child looked exactly like the poster, but also somehow more real, more present than any person Jake had ever seen. As if this child existed in multiple dimensions at once. "Hello," the child said in a voice that sounded both young and very old. "Thank you for freeing my friends." "Your friends?" Jake asked. "The wolves. They didn't want to guard me. They were forced to, like I was forced to wait here." The Dino Kid stood up, and Jake saw that the child seemed to shimmer slightly, as if not entirely solid. They used to be people, you know. Researchers who got changed by the same experiments that changed Mama. "How long have you been waiting?" Sam asked gently. "A very long time. Since the bad people came and made everything wrong." The child's eyes were sad but hopeful. "Will you help me find my family?" "Your family?" "My mama and my brother and sisters. We got separated when the bad things happened. Mama is looking for us, but she can't find us all at the same time because we're scattered across different wens." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Your mama? Is she tall? With antlers? The Dino Kid nodded enthusiastically. She got changed by the bad people, but she's still my mama. She loves us so much, she looks for us every night and every time, hoping that someday we'll all be together again. Sam and Jake exchanged glances. The deer wasn't a monster hunting them. It was a mother searching for her lost children across time and space. Where are your brother and sisters? Jake asked. Scattered around the forest, hidden in different time bubbles. The bad people locked us in different places, so Mama couldn't find us all together. But you can help. You can bring us all home. The child reached up and took Jake's hand. The moment their skin touched, Jake felt a surge of warmth and understanding. He could sense the other children, their locations, their fear, their desperate hope for rescue. But more than that, he could feel the mother's anguish, decades of searching and never finding her complete family. I know where they are now, Jake said to Sam. All of them. They helped the Dino Kid out of the cave, and the moment the child stepped into sunlight, something magical happened. The forest around them became brighter, more alive. Birds began singing, flowers bloomed, and the oppressive atmosphere that had haunted them since arriving lifted slightly. Each child we rescue makes the forest a little more normal, Jake realized. They're not just trapped here, they're connected to this place somehow. Their separation is what's making everything wrong. The Dino Kid led them back toward their camp, chattering happily about being free and seeing Mama again. But as they walked, the child also told them more disturbing things about the bad people who had caused all this trouble. They wore white coats and had needles, the child explained. They said they were making us better, making us special. They wanted to see if families could stay connected across time and space. But the experiments went wrong. Instead of keeping us together, they scattered us apart. What happened to the bad people? Sam asked. Some of them got changed like Mama did. Others got stuck in the same time loops we're in, but they forgot who they used to be. They just keep following their old orders, even though the experiment ended a long time ago. Jake was beginning to understand the full scope of what had happened in this forest. Researchers studying family bonds and temporal displacement had accidentally created a pocket of broken time. A mother and her 4 children had been separated across different temporal coordinates, unable to reunite because the very act of searching for each other caused more temporal disturbance. The cultists, Jake realized. They're the researchers who got trapped here. They're still trying to complete their experiment, but they can't remember why. When they reached their camp, something wonderful happened. The Dino Kid ran to their notice board and touched his own missing poster. The image on the paper changed from missing to found, and a small tent appeared at the edge of their campfire's light, a cheerful red tent where the child could sleep safely. But more than that, the atmosphere around their entire camp improved. The shadows seemed less threatening. The sounds of the forest became more natural, and for the first time since arriving, Jake felt genuinely safe. 1 down, 3 to go, Jake said. But rescuing the other children would be more difficult. The blue cave was guarded by alpha wolves, larger, stronger, and more intelligent than the regular wolves they had faced. The yellow and purple caves had even more dangerous guardians, and they were located deeper in the forest, where time distortions were more severe. We need better equipment, Sam said practically, and we need to be smarter about this. They spent the next few days upgrading their base and their gear. The Dino Kid helped by sharing knowledge about the forest that proved invaluable. The child knew where to find rare materials, which areas were safe to explore, and most importantly, how to avoid the cultist patrols. The bad people in robes aren't really people anymore, the child explained as they worked on upgrading their crafting table. They got changed too, but in a different way. They think they're still doing science, but they're really just trying to keep families apart. Why don't they want the families together? Jake asked. Because together we're stronger. Apart we're just scared and lonely. They like us scared. because scared people are easier to study. This information changed Jake's entire understanding of their situation. They weren't just playing a survival game. They were part of a conflict that had been going on for decades. On one side were the cultists, trying to maintain their control over the forest and its trapped inhabitants. On the other side was a broken family, desperate to be reunited. We're going to help them, Jake decided. All of them. The rescue of the Kraken Kid was more challenging, but followed a similar pattern. The Blue Cave was deeper in the forest, past a series of ponds that had recently become infested with strange, poisonous frogs. These weren't normal frogs. They were bright green, moved in organized groups, and seemed to be actively hunting anything that entered their territory. New bad things, the Dino Kid explained when they encountered the first group of hostile frogs. They came when the forest got more sick. Everything that doesn't belong here makes the forest more confused. The frogs were a recent addition to the forest's dangers, created by the increasing temporal instability. As more time passed without the family being reunited, the forest was generating new threats and obstacles. But Jake had an idea. What if we're not supposed to fight everything? What if some of these creatures are just confused, like the wolves were? They approached the frog-infested ponds more carefully, and Jake was right. The frogs weren't attacking randomly. They were protecting something. In the center of the largest pond was a small island with a glowing crystal that pulsed with the same energy as the keys. That's a time anchor, the Dino Kid said excitedly. If we can get it, we can use it to stabilize the other time bubbles. Getting to the island required teamwork and creativity. Sam distracted the frogs while Jake swam to the island and retrieved the crystal. The moment he touched it, Jake felt a surge of temporal energy that let him see the forest as it really was. Not just a single place, but multiple versions of the same place existing simultaneously. The alpha wolves guarding the Blue Cave were indeed more dangerous than their regular counterparts. Their blue collars seemed to enhance their strength and intelligence, and they fought with coordinated tactics that suggested military training. But Jake and Sam had learned from their previous encounter. Instead of fighting the wolves directly, they focused on removing the collars that were controlling them. The time anchor crystal made this easier. It stabilized the temporal distortions around the collars, allowing Jake and Sam to safely approach and remove them. Each freed alpha wolf looked at them with the same gratitude they had seen from the regular wolves, then bounded off into the forest to resume their natural lives. The Kraken Kid was found in similar circumstances. A child who had been waiting far too long in a cave decorated with drawings and memories. This child wore a blue squid hat and seemed even more ethereal than the Dino Kid, as if existing in multiple time streams simultaneously. 2 siblings found, the Kraken Kid said happily when they were reunited at the camp. Mama will be so excited, but she still can't come close until we're all together. Why not? Sam asked. Because the bad people made rules. Mama can only come home when her whole family is safe. If even one of us is missing, she has to keep looking. It's like a spell that can't be broken until it's complete. This explained the deer's behavior perfectly. It wasn't hunting them maliciously. It was desperately searching for its missing children, unable to rest or find peace until the family was complete. Every night, it circled their camp, not as a predator, but as a mother checking to see if her children had come home. With 2 children safely at their camp, the changes in the forest were dramatic. Their safe zone expanded, the air became cleaner, and they could see wildlife returning to areas that had been empty before. Even the weather improved. The oppressive grey clouds that had covered the sky since their arrival began to break up, allowing actual sunlight to filter through. But the cultist attacks were getting more frequent and more desperate. They know what we're doing, the Dino Kid explained after they fought off another group. They're scared we'll fix what they broke. If the family gets back together, the temporal distortions will stabilize and they'll remember who they used to be. What happens when all 4 children are rescued? Jake asked. Then Mama can come home, the Kraken Kid said simply. And the forest can start getting better. And maybe the bad people can remember how to be good people again. But the final 2 rescues would test everything they had learned, because the remaining children were trapped in the most dangerous parts of the forest, where time moved differently and the very air was filled with temporal static. The Squid Kid was imprisoned in a yellow cave deep in the heart of the forest, past the cultist stronghold they had seen marked on their map. This area was heavily patrolled and filled with dangerous creatures, not just wolves, but bears that had been similarly modified with control collars and strange bird-like creatures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The journey to the yellow cave took them through territory that felt actively hostile. Trees seemed to lean in toward the path, shadows moved when they shouldn't, and they could hear whispers in languages they didn't recognize. The air itself felt thick and wrong, as if they were walking through invisible syrup. "The forest is sickest here," the Dino Kid explained, staying close to Jake and Sam. "This is where the bad people did their worst experiments. They tried to create creatures that could exist in multiple timelines at once. They had to fight their way past 2 massive bears wearing yellow collars. These creatures were even stronger than the alpha wolves, and their collars seemed to be powered by the same temporal energy as the time anchor crystal. But they also seemed to be suffering more than any creature they had encountered. Their eyes showed pain and confusion, as if they were trapped in bodies that belonged in different time periods. They're just like Mama," the Kraken Kid realized. "Changed against their will, trying to be what the experiments made them instead of what they really are." Removing the collars required all their skills and both children's help. The Dino Kid and Kraken Kid worked together to create temporal stability fields around the bears, while Jake and Sam worked to cut through the collar materials. The process was dangerous. The temporal energy discharged in random bursts, and they had to dodge lightning-like strikes of pure time. When the first collar came off, the bear immediately stopped attacking and looked around in bewilderment, as if waking from a decades-long nightmare. It looked at its own paws, as if seeing them for the first time, then at Jake and the children with profound gratitude, before wandering off into the forest. The Squid Kid was found in the most elaborate prison yet, a chamber filled with complex machinery that hummed with electrical power and temporal energy. The child wore a yellow squid hat and had been connected to various monitoring devices that were apparently recording not just vital signs, but temporal coordinates and dimensional stability. "They were still watching me," the child said sadly as Jake disconnected the equipment. "Even after all this time, they wanted to see what I was thinking, how I was feeling, whether I could still sense Mama across time." "Who's they?" Sam asked. "The bad people who never left. They're still here, still trying to finish their experiment, but they got changed too, and now they don't remember why they started. They just keep collecting data because that's what they've always done." The Squid Kid's rescue triggered an immediate response. Alarms began sounding throughout the forest, and they could see lights moving between the trees as cultist search parties mobilized. But this time, the cultists weren't just trying to recapture the children. They were trying to prevent the final rescue that would end their eternal experiment. "They're really angry now," the Dino Kid observed with surprising calm. "But it's okay. We're almost done." Getting back to camp required all their skills and knowledge. They had to avoid patrols, disable traps, and fight their way through several groups of hostile cultists. But they had help now. The forest itself seemed to be on their side, with paths opening up when they needed them, and dangerous areas becoming mysteriously safe. The 3 rescued children worked together to create protective barriers around their group, using their combined temporal abilities to deflect the cultists' attacks. Jake watched in amazement as the siblings demonstrated powers that went far beyond normal human capabilities. They could slow down time around their enemies, create shields of pure temporal energy, and even briefly phase out of normal time to avoid danger. "We're getting stronger now that we're together," the Kraken Kid explained as they outmaneuvered another cultist patrol. "The bad people scattered us because they were afraid of what we could do as a family. door. When they reached camp with the Squid Kid, their safe zone expanded dramatically. 3 colored tents now surrounded their campfire, and the area felt genuinely peaceful for the first time since they had arrived. The air was clean and sweet. Birds sang in the trees, and Jake could see normal woodland creatures, rabbits, deer, squirrels, returning to areas that had been barren before. But they could also sense the final challenge approaching. The forest around them was changing rapidly as the temporal distortions began to stabilize. In the distance, they could hear the sound of machinery shutting down and structures collapsing as decades of artificial time bubbles finally burst. The Koala Kid was held in the Purple Cave, which according to their map was located in the deepest, most dangerous part of the forest. This was where the original laboratory had been built, where everything had started going wrong decades ago. "Mama is getting excited," the 3 rescued children said in unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that sent chills down Jake's spine. "She can feel us coming together, but the bad people are getting desperate. They'll try to stop us with everything they have left." "Why?" Jake asked. "What are they afraid will happen?" "The truth," the children replied. "When our family is together, everyone will be able to see what really happened here. The bad people don't want anyone to know how wrong they were." The journey to the Purple Cave was unlike anything they had experienced. The forest became increasingly unnatural. Trees grew in perfect geometric patterns. Animals moved in formation like soldiers, and the ground itself seemed to pulse with temporal energy. They were walking through the heart of the original research facility, where the boundaries between natural and artificial had been completely erased. They passed the ruins of buildings that were clearly modern, concrete structures with broken windows and overgrown laboratories. Equipment that looked decades old was scattered throughout the area, much of it still powered by temporal energy sources that shouldn't exist. "This is where they changed Mama," the Dino Kid said quietly, as they passed what had once been the main research building. "She was just a normal person before. She had a job and a house and everything." "What kind of job?" Sam asked. "She was studying animals, trying to help them, but the bad people lied to her. They said they wanted to help animals too, but really they wanted to make weapons. They wanted to create creatures that could fight wars across multiple timelines." Jake was beginning to understand the full tragedy. A researcher had been tricked into participating in experiments that were supposed to enhance animal intelligence and temporal sensitivity. But when she realized her own children were being used as test subjects, she had tried to protect them. The transformation had been punishment and prison both. "She fought them," the Kraken Kid added. "When she found out what they were really doing, she tried to take us away. But they had already changed her too much. The experiments made her strong, but they also made her scary looking. People were afraid of her. So she hid in the forest," the Squid Kid continued. "And the bad people locked us up in different time bubbles so she could never find us all at once. They said it was for science, but really, they just wanted to punish her for trying to protect us. The Purple Cave was guarded by the most dangerous creatures yet. Bears that had been so heavily modified, they barely looked like animals anymore. Their purple collars pulsed with temporal energy, and they moved with perfect military precision. But more than that, they seemed to exist in multiple time streams simultaneously. Jake could see several versions of each bear overlapping in the same space. "These are the failures," the Dino Kid said sadly. "Creatures that got stuck between time periods. They can't die, but they can't really live either." But Jake and Sam had learned something important during their previous rescues. The collars weren't just control devices. They were also the source of the creature's pain and confusion. Every modified animal they had freed had shown relief and gratitude once the collar was removed. "We're not fighting enemies," Jake realized. "We're freeing prisoners." This changed their entire approach to the final Guardian challenge. Instead of trying to defeat the bears, they focused on liberating them from their temporal prison. It was the most dangerous task yet, They had to synchronize their actions across multiple time streams, removing collars from several versions of the same creature simultaneously. The three rescued children worked together to create a massive temporal stability field, while Jake and Sam used the time anchor crystal to phase between different time streams. It was exhausting and terrifying work. One mistake could trap them in the same temporal loop that held the bears. But when the last purple collar fell away, something beautiful happened. The multiple versions of each bear collapsed into a single normal animal that looked at them with intelligent, grateful eyes before wandering off into the forest to live a natural life. The purple cave was the most elaborate prison of all. The koala kid was found in a chamber that looked like a high-tech medical facility crossed with a temporal research laboratory. Monitors showed not just brainwave patterns and heartbeat readings, but temporal coordinates, dimensional stability readings, and what looked like love-level measurements. They wanted to understand how we stayed connected to Mama, the child explained as Jake and Sam disconnected the monitoring equipment. Even when we were apart, even when we were in different time periods, we could still feel her love. They thought if they studied us enough, they could figure out how to break that connection. But they couldn't, Sam observed. Love isn't something you can break with machines, the koala kid said simply. It just gets stronger when people try to hurt it. Every day they kept us apart. Mama loved us more. Every experiment they did just made our family bond stronger. The moment the last wire was disconnected, the entire research facility began to shake apart. Emergency lights flashed, alarms sounded throughout the forest, and they could hear the sound of large machinery shutting down after decades of continuous operation. "What's happening?" Jake asked. "The experiment is ending," all four children said in unison, their voices now clearly coming from the same source. "Mama can come home now." They helped the koala kid out of the cave, and the moment the child stepped into the forest, everything changed. The unnatural geometric patterns in the trees dissolved into normal forest growth. The modified animals wandering the forest stopped their mechanical behavior and began acting like natural wildlife. Even the air smelled cleaner, more like a real forest instead of a laboratory. "The forest is healing," the dino kid explained as they walked back toward their camp. "It was sick because our family was broken. Now that we're together, everything can start getting better." But their victory celebration was interrupted by the arrival of the cultists. Not just a few patrol members this time, but dozens of them, surrounding the area with weapons drawn. These weren't the confused, programmed beings they had encountered before. These cultists moved with desperation and intelligence, as if they were finally remembering who they used to be. "You have interfered with critical research," their leader announced. But his voice was different now. Less flat and emotionless, more human. "The temporal displacement project cannot be terminated. Too much depends on its success." Jake stepped forward, the four children safe behind him and Sam. "What depends on it? What were you really trying to accomplish?" The cultist leader hesitated, and for the first time, Jake could see the human being underneath the robes and programming. We were trying to save people. There was a war coming, multiple timeline wars. We needed weapons that could fight across different periods of history." "So, you experimented on a family," Sam said quietly. We believed that family bonds might be the key to temporal stability. If we could understand how love works across time and space, we could create soldiers who could coordinate attacks across multiple timelines." The leader's voice was breaking now, as if decades of suppressed memories were flooding back. "But the subjects showed unprecedented resistance to our protocols because they loved each other," the koala kid said, stepping forward without fear. "And love is stronger than any experiment." The cultist leader looked directly at the children, for what might have been the first time in decades. Jake could see recognition dawning in those eyes, not just of data points and test subjects, but of actual people who had been suffering for far too long. "We caused so much pain," the leader whispered. "We separated a mother from her children. We turned love into a weapon. We broke something beautiful and called it science." "The experiment failed," the Kraken kid said gently. "Not because we weren't strong enough, but because we were too strong. Our family couldn't be broken no matter what you did to us, did to..." One by one, the other cultists began removing their hoods, revealing faces that looked human but exhausted, as if they had been carrying a terrible burden for decades. Some of them were crying as memories of their former lives returned. "We couldn't stop," one of them said. "The programming wouldn't let us. We tried to end the experiment years ago, but we were trapped in the same temporal loop as the subjects. We've been following the same orders for 40 years, unable to remember why we started or how to stop. We just wanted to go home," another added. "But home doesn't exist anymore. The war we were preparing for never happened. The world moved on without us." Jake understood now. Everyone in the forest, the family, the researchers, even the modified animals, had been prisoners of the same failed experiment. The cultists hadn't been evil scientists. They had been dedicated researchers who got trapped by their own temporal manipulation technology. "Then let's all go home," Sam suggested. But before anyone could move, they heard it. The sound they had been both anticipating and dreading throughout their entire journey. Footsteps in the forest. Heavy, deliberate, approaching through the trees with purpose and hope. The deer was coming. Everyone in the clearing tensed. The cultists from decades of programmed fear, Jake and Sam from weeks of running and hiding. But the 4 children just smiled with pure joy. "Mama," they said in unison. The creature that emerged from the forest was the deer they had feared for so long. But now Jake could see it clearly for what it truly was. Yes, it was tall and transformed, with antlers and eyes that reflected light. Yes, the experiments had changed its physical form dramatically. But underneath all the modifications, it was unmistakably a person. A mother who had been searching for her children for almost 40 years, never giving up hope, never stopping her search, even when it seemed impossible. The deer stopped at the edge of the clearing, looking around at the scene before her. Her 4 children safe and together, the researchers who had tormented them for so long, and the 2 strangers who had helped reunite her family. "My babies," the deer said in a voice that was part growl, part sob, completely filled with love. "My beautiful, wonderful babies. Are you safe? Are you hurt? Are you really here? Or is this another dream?" The 4 children ran to their transformed mother, and she gathered them in her arms with movements that were surprisingly gentle despite her fearsome appearance. Jake watched as decades of anguish melted away from the creature's features, replaced by pure maternal joy. "We're okay, Mama," the children assured her, their voices blending together in perfect harmony. "These nice people helped us. And look, the bad people aren't bad anymore. They remembered how to be good." The deer looked over at the cultists, her former captors and tormentors. And Jake held his breath, wondering if decades of anger and pain would finally explode into violence. Instead, the creature spoke with dignity and surprising compassion. "You took my children from me," she said to the lead researcher, her voice carrying the weight of 40 years of grief. "You changed me into something I never wanted to be. You turned my love into something frightening, something that scared people instead of comforting them." The cultist leader fell to his knees, finally fully remembering what they had done. "We were wrong. We thought we could improve on nature, but we only caused suffering. We turned a beautiful family into our prisoners. We're so sorry." "Sorry doesn't give me back 40 years, the deer replied, but her voice was gentle rather than angry. Sorry doesn't erase the loneliness or the fear or the endless nights of searching. She looked down at her children, safe in her arms at last. But my family is together now. That's what matters. That's all that's ever mattered. She turned to Jake and Sam, her inhuman eyes filled with gratitude and warmth. You could have hurt us, she said. When you were afraid, when we seemed dangerous, when everyone told you we were monsters, you could have tried to harm us. Instead, you chose to help us. Why? Jake thought about it for a moment, remembering all the nights they had spent afraid, all the times they could have given up, all the moments when fighting would have been easier than understanding. Because you weren't really dangerous, he said finally. You were just sad. And nobody should have to be sad for 40 years, especially not because they love their family too much. The deer smiled, an expression that should have been terrifying on her transformed features, but instead looked beautiful, radiant with decades of suppressed joy. The forest has been sick because we were broken, she explained, gesturing to the trees and wildlife around them. Our separation created temporal distortions that affected everything in this area. Now that my family is whole again, everything can heal, including the people who hurt us. She gestured toward the cultists, who were looking around as if seeing the forest clearly for the first time in decades. They were trapped here as long as we were, the mother continued, forced to continue an experiment that should have ended long ago. The same temporal distortions that scattered my family also imprisoned them in a loop of following orders they no longer understood. But now, they can choose what to do with their lives. The lead researcher looked up hopefully. We can choose? The programming is really broken? The experiment is over, the deer confirmed. The temporal loops are collapsing. The research facility is shutting down. You're free to remember who you were before all this started. Over the next few hours, Jake and Sam watched something remarkable happen. As the sun set on what had been their most dangerous day in the forest, it rose on something entirely new and hopeful. The cultists began removing their robes and equipment, revealing themselves to be confused but fundamentally decent people who had been trapped by their own research for decades. Some of them had families waiting in the outside world, families who thought they had died in a research accident 40 years ago. My wife, one researcher whispered, staring at his hands, as if seeing them for the first time. My children. Are they still? Time will tell, the mother said gently. But you have the chance to find out now. The modified animals throughout the forest were freed from their control systems, returning to natural behavior patterns. The unnatural geometric shapes in the landscape dissolved, replaced by normal forest growth. Even the weather improved. The artificial storm systems created by the temporal distortions finally dissipated, allowing real sunlight to warm the forest floor. And the family at the center of it all was finally, truly together. What happens now? Sam asked, as they sat around their campfire one last time. The deer, still transformed, but no longer frightening, sat nearby with her children. In the firelight, surrounded by her family, she looked less like a monster and more like any parent who had finally found their lost children. Now we live, she said simply. We've spent so long just surviving, just searching, just being afraid. Now we can actually live. We can be a family again. Where will you go? Nowhere, the Dino Kid laughed, snuggling against his transformed mother. This is our home. The forest was sick, but now it's getting better. We want to stay and help it heal completely. What about us? The Kraken Kid asked, looking at the former cultists. What will happen to the people who hurt us? The mother considered this carefully. They will have to live with what they did. But they will also have the chance to do better. Some mistakes can't be undone, but they can be learned from. "And you?" the deer asked Jake and Sam. "Will you stay? You're part of our family now, if you want to be. You helped us when no one else could. This will always be your home too." Jake looked around the clearing. The forest did feel different now, peaceful instead of threatening, mysterious instead of dangerous. He could imagine staying here, helping the family adjust to being together again, watching the forest heal and grow. But he could also feel something else, a longing for the world they had left behind, for their own families who might be worried about them. "We should go back," he said reluctantly. "People will be worried about us. Our families will be looking for us." The deer nodded with understanding. "Of course, family is important. All families, not just ours." "But you'll remember us?" the koala kid asked hopefully. "Always," Sam promised. "And maybe we can visit sometimes, when things are settled." "The forest will always welcome you," the mother assured them. "You helped us when we needed it most. You chose love over fear, understanding over violence. This will always be your home, and we will always be your family." As dawn approached, Jake and Sam gathered their few remaining possessions. The children gave them small gifts to remember their adventure, carved wooden figures that seemed to pulse with their own internal warmth. "How do we get back to the real world?" Jake asked. Dr. Harrison, the lead researcher who had finally remembered his name and his humanity, stepped forward. "The same way you came in," he explained. "The forest exists in many places at once, connected to the normal world through temporal bridges. When you walked into these woods, you walked into our story. When you walk out, you'll walk back into yours. But it's all connected," the Kraken kid added. "Stories are like that. They touch each other in places you don't expect. Love creates connections across time and space." Jake and Sam said their goodbyes, promising to remember and to tell others about the importance of choosing understanding over fear. Behind them, they could hear the family settling in for their first peaceful day in decades. Children playing normal games, a mother humming lullabies, researchers planning how to study nature without harming it. As they reached the edge of the forest, Jake turned back for one last look. The woods were beautiful in the morning light, alive with birdsong and natural sounds. If he hadn't lived through the past weeks, he never would have guessed that it had once been a place of terror and trapped souls. "Do you think it really happened?" Sam asked, as they stepped out of the woods and back onto familiar paths leading to their normal world. Jake looked at the small wooden figure in his pocket, a tiny carving of a child in a dinosaur hat, made with unmistakable love and skill. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse gently, as if it contained a piece of the family's happiness. "Yeah," he said, "it happened, and it was the most important thing we'll ever do." They walked home together, changed by their experience but glad to be returning to their own families. Behind them, the forest rustled peacefully in the morning breeze, finally at peace after 40 years of searching and sorrow. But their story wasn't quite over. That night, Jake had a dream. He was back in the forest, sitting around the campfire with the reunited family. The children were growing up safely now, learning normal things and playing normal games. The mother was changing too, still transformed, but becoming more human-like as her anger and fear faded away, replaced by contentment and joy. "Thank you," she said to him in the dream, "for giving us the chance to be a family again, for showing us that there are still people in the world who choose love over fear." "Will we see each other again?" Jake asked. "When you need us," she replied, "and when we need you. Friends are like family. Distance doesn't matter when love is real. The connections we made will last forever." Jake woke up with tears on his cheeks but a smile on his face. Outside his window, he could hear normal city sounds, cars, sirens, people living their everyday lives. But underneath it all, if he listened carefully, he could also hear something else. The sound of children playing safely in a peaceful forest, watched over by a mother who would never let anything hurt them again. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the world seemed too harsh and complicated, Jake would close his eyes and remember the most important lesson he had learned during his time in the forest. Love is stronger than fear. Families belong together. And sometimes, the scariest monsters are just people who need help finding their way home. The game was over, but the love would last forever. Years later, when Jake was grown up with children of his own, he would tell them the story of the forest family. His kids would listen with wide eyes, asking if it was really true. All the best stories are true, Jake would tell them. Maybe not in the way we expect, but true in the ways that matter most. And sometimes, when his children were having bad dreams or feeling scared, Jake would show them the small wooden figure he kept on his nightstand, a reminder that even in the darkest forests, love could light the way home. The figure of the Dino Kid would seem to smile in the lamplight, as if it knew that some stories never really end. They just become part of the people who lived them, ready to offer comfort and courage whenever they're needed most. Sam, meanwhile, became a teacher who specialized in helping troubled children. He never forgot the lesson of the forest, that behind every frightening behavior was usually a scared person who just wanted to be understood and loved. He kept his own wooden figure, the Kraken Kid, in his classroom. When students asked about it, he would tell them it represented the idea that everyone deserves a chance to be rescued, no matter how lost they might seem. And both Jake and Sam would sometimes wake up on quiet mornings with the strange but comforting feeling that somewhere, in a peaceful forest far from the noise of the world, a family was starting their day together, safe, happy, and whole at last. The forest still existed, of course. Other people would find their way there when they needed to learn the same lessons Jake and Sam had discovered. The family would help each new visitor understand that love is stronger than fear, that broken things can be healed, and that sometimes the most important victory is simply choosing to see the person behind the monster. Because in the end, that's what their adventure had really been about. Not surviving a game, but learning that every frightening story is really a love story in disguise, waiting for someone brave enough to look past the scary parts and see the hearts beneath. And the forest family would be there, patient and kind, for as long as people needed to learn that lesson, forever and always, teaching the world that home isn't a place, it's the people who love you, no matter what you look like or how long you've been apart. The children had called it 99 Nights in the Forest, but the love story it told would last much, much longer than that. It would last forever.